Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm so delighted to be here today with author Christina Chiu. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so
Oh,
excited to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you so very much for taking the time to speak with me today. Christina Chiu is the author of Troublemaker and Other Saints, which won the Asian American Literary Award. Her second book, Beauty, which I have an advanced reader copy here in my hands right now, won. Oh, wait, you have a copy too. So fantastic. This book won the James Allen McPherson 2040 Book Award. Chu has published in magazines and anthologies, including Tin House, The MacGuffin, and Washington Square, among others. She is also a shoe designer. So I am super, super excited to have this conversation. Let's start with Beauty, this fantastic book right here. Tell me about the book.
So, Beauty is about a woman who she goes into the fashion industry, and that's just the basic storyline. But the real arc of it it includes her whole life. And it really shows the difficulties and the conflicts that she experiences throughout her life. And she's a very gifted designer, but because of the circumstances, she doesn't end up pushing through and achieving her potential. It isn't until later, when she starts to make certain realizations and change, that things start to turn around.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you for that little teaser. And the book is really interesting in the way that it's presented, because it is almost like episodic moments in your protagonist's life. And the protagonist is named Amy Wong. And so tell me a little bit more about why you decided to cover her whole life in almost these little glimpses.
So initially, I wrote a more conventional storyline, today, tomorrow, next week, whatever. But then it turned out that about several years into the writing of it, I was struggling with the structure, and then I realized, oh, I have this all wrong. This is not about her life. It's about these moments. These are the moments that make up her path to self-discovery. And I call it karmic moments, but really they're just, in fiction, it's the plotting of those moments that lead you to a final result. And I did a lot of research on trauma, and it occurred to me that one event triggers something else, and it triggers something else, and it becomes part of a behavioral pattern. And it can, if you're not even aware of what's going on, you can end up being pretty miserable. And so this character is at a certain point pretty miserable, but then she makes a certain realization about beliefs that she has, that she's been holding since she was young. And after that, it's like she's let out of a cage, So.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Super, super interesting. Well, thank you. Thank you for playing with that structure and giving. I think the beauty of fiction is sometimes we can see these moments in a way of in a moment of clarity that we sometimes don't get on our own lives. So, really fascinating to get to see those moments with your protagonist, Amy. And so, another question I have is, in an interview you gave on The Rumpus about beauty,
Mm-hmm.
you were talking about fashion, and you said, the most interesting kind of fashion is a form of visual art. Instead of hanging a work on a wall, however, it's on a body. It's a visual statement we wear. And so you mentioned that fashion is very much so a prominent theme in this book and comes up a lot along the way. Can you tell me more a little bit about that quote and that statement and how it made its way into beauty?
So when I started writing this book, I knew the perfunctory things about fashion, right? But the more I researched, the more interesting I realized fashion was. And I think the general concept of fashion is that it's kind of superficial, like there are these pretty people who walk around, whatever. But some of the most intriguing works are pieces that are developed by designers who, in many respects, are comparable to what fiction writers or other artists are doing, but the only difference is it's for your body. So like I'll use Comme des Garçons. They are a designer that not too many people know, but the designer made this huge, huge change in the industry because feminine attire went from being like pretty restrictive and you know, in a very certain way to actually caring about how it felt on the body. That was a huge shift, and it's those kinds of things that I find very intriguing. And it's often, you know, you never really realize that they're actually they're trend setting way ahead of everyone else, you know, because the whole gender issues, they were dealing with this 20 years ago. Like we're only now starting to be in the mainstream, but they were actually dealing with this many years ago already.
Fascinating. Fascinating. But were there other things that surprised you in your research into the fashion industry?
Yes, I took a shoemaking class because I realized at one point that my character actually shoemakes. So I took this shoemaking class, and it was absolutely fascinating. It was really hard. It's hard to make a shoe, but I got hooked and I got kind of addicted. So I make boots in particular. I just love making them, and it's been really fun, and it's given me a creative outlet from the writing. So, you know, writing's so cerebral, and making shoes is like everything with your hands, and you have to really focus, and you know, you have to troubleshoot in a lot of the same ways as writing, but everything's physical, everything's visual, you can see it, and it's just lovely that way.
Oh, how fascinating to be researching a novel and then to find another creative outlet along the way. And they sound actually very complementary, you know, that like you were saying, it's very tactile, it's very immediate, you have to be really present, as opposed to so often writing and reading is really all in our heads, it's really cerebral, you can like agonize it forever. But I imagine at a certain point you got to be like, I'm gonna wear the shoe. Let's get this finished.
Yeah, exactly. And but you know, it's just like the writing process. Sometimes you just wish it would be done already, but
Sure.
It's not done until it's done. And sometimes things don't work out the way you envisioned in your mind, and you have to accept what it is for what it is. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And so that can be really hard.
Yes, yes, yes. And I imagine that's true in the writing process too, right? You think that the idea is going to come out one way and it comes out a totally different way. And you have to do that, like, you know, kind of matching up like, oh, is this the better way to do it? Is that the better way to do it? How can we meet in the middle? Or maybe the character was right and I just should go totally off plan. It's always a little bit of an
That's exactly
uncharted
right.
adventure. Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's not about you, it's about the work. And you have to constantly listen to the work and watch the work. And I think that's one of the struggles I've always had. Like, I want to control the work because, you know, I don't want to go into one scene, you know, like some of the scenes are pretty graphic sexually. And I didn't actually want to go there because, you know, one of the things people always assume is that it's the writer who's writing about themselves, and it's not. But you know, I just wasn't sure if I was comfortable doing it, but then it became integral to the story.
Yeah, and actually, thank you for bringing that up. That was actually going to be one of my next questions. Is so, you know, certainly fashion, as we've talked about, is essential. You need a body. You know, fashion is sort of required to have a wearer in order to, you know, engage in the world. And alongside that, you know, sexuality is part of our bodies, right? And how we express ourselves sexually is part of that process as well. And so, as you mentioned, there is a lot of sex in the novel Beauty. So, can you tell me a little bit more about how that kind of came out in the novel and how that worked as you were doing the writing process?
So Amy's a very sexual character, and part of it is just that was the nature of this character. This character is from a short story that I started in my collection of short stories, and she kind of hung on, and I had to, even though I was working on another novel, I had to put it down and work on this. And so that's just who she was. I couldn't be like, you know, I'm gonna, you know, I don't like that anymore. I'm gonna take that out. And I felt that instead of judging her, I should actually jump into this type, because in some ways she fits a certain stereotype, and I wanted to explore that type and really find the humanness in her, so that, you know, the only real way to deal with stereotypes is to confront them. And if you try to back away and nobody says anything, then they just continue. It's not like that it stops anything. So for me, it was about facing this stereotype. But secondly, I often read novels from male writers who write about sex from women's point of view. And I have to say, a lot of the time I'm like, I feel really sorry if that's what he thinks it is. Do you know what I mean? Like it's either written badly or definitely not a woman's point of view, or, you know, so I felt like, you know, for women to be able to claim that space a little bit and talk about it from, you know, their erotic standpoint, like, you know, versus what's already out there, right? So we expect, I think, men to know what we want, but how are they going to know what we want if we're not actually talking about it and writing about it? They don't really know. So I thought, well, okay, so I have to go there anyway, so I'll just go there, and that's what I did.
Well, fascinating, fascinating. Well, thank you. Thank you for exploring that stereotype and for writing it from a woman's point of view. I think you're right that there is more of that needed in literature, and to do so in a way that's okay for the reader to engage, right? Because we're doing it through Amy's perspective, through the protagonist, and we can say, well, maybe that lines up to my experience, maybe it doesn't, but either way, I can sort of see what this feels like if I try this out with a real character in this point of view. And so you mentioned exploring stereotypes. Were there other stereotypes that you found yourself exploring in the book?
Well, I forget that, but there is the sister character who I felt is also a type, but and I do explore her a little bit, but not as much as I had wanted to, because I didn't want it to take over this narrative. So yeah, I did explore that a little bit, but not as much as I'd like, is basically the answer.
Sure, sure. Like many good characters, like maybe she just needs her own book and you'll just have to cross that bridge another day, right?
Exactly.
Yes, yes, very good. Well, for my last question, I love to close to hear about what people are reading. Must Read Fiction is a group of readers, and we are always looking for our next great read. So, are there any books that you're reading that are giving you life right now, or
Yeah.
is there a novel that you wish that everyone would read, that whenever someone says, "Oh, give me something great," you have like, "Oh, you have to read this. This is the book that I love most of all." Yeah, are there any books that you can leave us with?
Yes. So I have two kids, and until this pandemic, I really had no time to read. It was very difficult to find time. I would read right before bed, and I'd be exhausted, and I wouldn't really get the full, you know, full meaning of what I was reading. And so this has been really great. I've been able to read a lot and catch up and reread books that I haven't read before. So I'm reading this book by Liza Nash Taylor.
Uh-huh.
It's called Etiquette for Runaways. And
Fantastic.
I'm rereading Alyssa Chappelle's book, Blueprints for Building Better Girls.
Mm-hmm.
It's like so good. Whenever I want to feel like I love literature, I read this. It makes me just feel like I'm doing this for the right reason.
Yes. Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing those two books with us. Thank you for sharing beauty with us and for doing the great work to write it and to bring it into the world. And thank you, Christina Chiu. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you so much.